I'm the Executive Director, the head of the Schuylkill Regatta, and on behalf of the Board of Directors and the Committee 50, we welcome you to our 12th Story Hour. We're excited to have this conversation tonight with Jim Dietz. No doubt this will be a most informative and entertaining hour spent with rowing friends, celebrating one of our most decorated giants. He continues to give back and grow our sport. And his discussion of sculling in America, past, present, and future, is going to be one not to miss. So we will start with that as a conversation piece, and then we'll move on to hearing some of the legendary stories of Jimmy D and friends, and some that you may have never heard before. So I'm going to keep my intro short here because we have a lot to get through. But with over 95 folks registered, I just want to give a few housekeeping items to help with the sound and the flow. So even though the Zoom format can be a little tricky with a large group, we continue to use it because you can see one another and we can see our reactions and our smiles and our laughter. And the storytellers aren't only sharing with us, but we're sharing with them recognition and appreciation for their contributions and their successes in our community. So I've muted everyone to eliminate any background noise. You have the ability to unmute yourself at any time. If you wanted to add in something, please do. This is very informal, but just be careful if there's any background noise that you have. Just make sure that you're being careful so we can make sure that everybody can hear those that are speaking. If you haven't already, put your screen on gallery view so you can see a lot of people at once. That's in that top right corner. And then you can scroll through. There'll probably be 3 or 4 screens worth of folks to scroll through. I also encourage you to keep your chat room visible off to the side and use it if you want to throw in a comment or pose a question. You can do so there. In addition, just be aware that we are recording this session, so it's available for those that were unable to join us tonight. And also just record a lot of these stories. Philadelphia, especially, our community has been hit hard this year with the loss of quite a few legendary folks. So this just continues to be so important to record and really connect people throughout the year. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our facilitators this evening, Alan Robinson and Rick Stehlik. Alan was a Ted Nash never rode before recruit for Penn. He was one of the hardy handful that Ted, as a freshman and varsity coach over their 4-year Penn career. After 36 years away from rowing, Alan returned as a member of University Barge Club. Alan now lives and sculls on Cape Cod, where he is out on the water in a single on a daily basis, going together with Jim Dietz and a very fine group of single scullers. Alan is an HOSR board and Story Hour committee member. Rick started rowing at Harriton High School in 1962, and after graduation became a member of the Malta Boat Club. Rowing in Pittsburgh while at college, he was the only rower at the time in the city. By necessity, he became a single sculler and has been a competitor ever since at all levels and regattas, including the very first HOSR, and is planning to row in this year's race. He has served many capacities at his club, including president and chairman of the House Committee. He was also their coach for 15 years, developing competitive crews, including members of the U.S. teams. So before I turn it over, I just wanted to just say that our thoughts are with those in Florida this evening. We know that there's a number of people that won't be able to join us, and we're keeping everyone in our prayers. It's good to know many of the people have checked in and are safe, but we know they have a long cleanup ahead of them. So our thoughts and prayers are with them. So with that, Alan and Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you. Just don't forget to unmute yourselves.
Rick, can't hear you. Rick?
Okay, there we go.
There you go.
There you go.
All right, there we go. Well, thank you very much, Jen, for that introduction. Our committee, which Jen has talked about when we came up with the topic of Jim, Alan and I and many others said, well, how do we approach it? I mean, one guy asked me, is this going to be a roast of Jim? And hopefully we'll do that a little bit later on. But we realized that one of the most important thing we wanted to talk about was the sculling, because Jim has had his whole career has been based around sculling, along with some sweep, but mostly sculling, as he's noted for. And we wanted to address all the changes which have been happening in rowing in our experience, which goes back 60 years between myself and Jim. We both go back about 60 years together, along with all the other folks we're going to talk to tonight. And we don't want to go down too far down memory lane, but we want to talk a little bit about what it was like back in 60 years ago, how sculling in particular was approached around the country with the club system, for lack of a better word, and how we grew up in that system. And it had its strong points and it had its weak points, but it did produce consistently results, both on a national level and an international level, of which Jim certainly was a product. So we want to talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to turn it over to Jim. He's going to talk about his experiences during that period of time, and then we'll try and look forward and see what we can draw upon to make suggestions and hear ideas from the people assembled here tonight on how we might take those lessons and make it better for the sport for current days. It's interesting. I first met Jim, actually, I think it was around 1969, 1970, when he was at the Vesper Boat Club being coached by Dietrich Rose. And Jim was a part of a very elite group of scullers then, and lived at Vesper Boat Club for 1 or 2 years, I think, Jim, and lived in what we called the Black Hole of Calcutta, up in the 3rd floor of Vesper Boat Club. But it was kind of indicative of how rowers at that time, most everybody had a job, and many of us were working full time, and in addition to rowing, and to support ourselves to make it all work. But I think the system then was that, we all started out in our respective interests, in this case, sculling. And there was a definite system that would allow us to move up as we competed. And we did compete a lot of races. During the summer, there was typically 10 to 12 regattas, not even counting the head of the Schuylkill and the head of the Charles. And we went around the country rowing against each other in these regattas. New York AC was the big powerhouse back then. But in Philadelphia, we had Undine and Malta, I like to think. And we saw each other almost on a weekly basis. And we would race against each other and gain a heck of a lot of experience, and had a careers individually, which spanned typically 10 to 15 years. An interesting note is that Larry Krakowsky, who we had a session about earlier this year, won over 800 races in his career. Now, when you think about that, he won 800 races. So how many races would he have had to have been in? And how many regattas does that represent? And Jim, we'll see here in a minute, had, very close to that number of races himself. So the lesson was that we all became very experienced in rowing. And so we went overseas. That experience played out and allowed us to, approach it in a much different way. Certainly when Jim went overseas and did very well, and then going on into his coaching career, he had all that experience in his background, which helped him out. So we're going to talk about that tonight. Jim has a lot of views on this, and it's an open forum. I say we don't want to dwell too much on the past, but we want to see what we can draw from the past and maybe get some lessons going forward. I'd like to mention tonight that we have on the call, I think it's kind of interesting. I see Amanda Krause is there. Amanda, I'm sorry, I've never met you personally, but she's the executive director of the U.S. Rowing now, and facing a lot of challenges to move the sport forward. I'm not sure if Sandy Killen's on tonight, but Sandy is from New York AC, and he was part of that rowing scene that we're going to talk about tonight. Fred Dooling, my rowing partner for many years, is on the call from Malta Boat Club. And he and I were, we used to see Jim all the time. Fred rowed with me, rowed with Bill Belden, Larry Krakowsky, all these folks. And every time we looked around, we'd look over on to the next lane and we see Jim and Larry and Sandy and all these folks. But we had these great rivalries going on, which just made us better oarsmen. Also on the call tonight, I'm not sure if she made it, but Jinx Becker-Sacco, she's down in Florida. She may not have made it tonight, but I think Penny Henwood is also on the call tonight. And I want to mention those two folks in particular, and I hope I didn't miss anyone, because they were part of the Vichy 8 in 1967, representing the Philadelphia Girls Club, and then ultimately the United States in the first ever women's crew. And they are now about to be inducted next weekend at the head of the Charles into the NRF Hall of Fame, which is a great, long overdue accomplishment. So congratulations to those two, and we all wish them thank you very much for the job you did forging the way for women's rowing back then. Moving on, I want to say a few words about Jim. Nothing bad yet, but I was telling Jen a few minutes ago when I was preparing for tonight, I started to make a list of Jim's bio, if you will, and I quickly ran out of rowing bio, and I quickly ran out of a page to try and get everything in. I think many of you know Jim's bio, but let's just go through it real quick. 1967, and Jim, correct me if I make any mistakes, World Juniors champion. 1974, silver medal at Lucerne in the single scull at the World Championships. 4 Pan Am teams, winning a gold, 2 silvers, and a bronze. Member of 3 Olympic squads. Unfortunately, 1980 wasn't able to go because the U.S. didn't go. Became the coach for a year at Merchant Marine Academy and then Coast Guard for about 12 years, I believe, Jim. And then moved down there to U of Mass as their coach for 24 years, I think, is about what it worked out to be. So Jim, when he hung up his, what should we say, competitive rowing time, although he's still rowing and still competing, became a coach. And I'll probably touch later on how that all transpired. But he became a coach for 2 quality programs, in particular UMass, which was the women's program, which he championed and really put forward and had great success with. Jim's a member of the Rowing Hall of Fame, and New York AC's Hall of Fame, and I don't know how many other honors there are in there, but there's quite a few. So he is recognized not only for his rowing accomplishments, of which I was proud to say I was able to race against many times, most always to his benefit, but it was an honor to race against Jim and the guys from New York AC. We had a lot of fun, and I think it developed us all to be better scullers and people, and going through that experience. But what I found interesting was that despite all of Jim's international experience, he still managed, and managed isn't probably the right word, but he did win 45 national titles and 37 Canadian championships. So when you think about that, he didn't forget his roots. And I'm sure Jack Soldier up at New York AC wouldn't let him do that. Mm-hmm. But he was still rowing in the circuit, if you will, that we had during the summer, coming down to Philadelphia to row in all the regattas we would have. And we would be going up to New York AC to row in his regattas. We would then go to the Nationals, wherever they might be that year. And the Canadian Henley, of course, up in St. Catharines, which we all went to, and just continued to race. What was interesting back at that time, there was a very definite progression system for people rowing at all levels, but you would start out, which then was called the junior, now would be the intermediate. And in order to move up in the progression system, you would have to win certain races. You'd have to win in certain intermediate races, then you become a senior. And if you win certain races on the senior level, then you became an elite oarsman, which was the goal of all of us to do. And the elite oarsmen invariably became the people that represented the United States overseas, because they'd earned their right, and they were the best. But there also were trials regattas throughout this. And as Jim's going to talk about, that whole system gradually changed away from, at one point, whoever won the national championship was the U.S. representative early on. But then there started trials regattas, And so we all went to trials and had to see who would go to the Olympics, who would go to the Pan Am Games and those various races. And that gradually started to morph into a camp system for certain boats, which changed the complexion of the sport, both for sweep and sculling on a lot of levels. And I know, Jim, you're going to talk about that, but I think there was quite a bit of controversy about that. And but that was the best route, because many of us were not only rowing, but we're also working full time, and many, but not most, were raising families. So there was a lot of arguments back and forth as to whether that was correct. But the reality is, international rowing is so competitive now, a lot of things had to change. So that's what I'd like to move on and let Alan take the lead here. But we're then going to ask Jim to really start talking about his experiences, which parallel what I think I've said, because we both went through the same years of development and places. And Jim's experience overseas is without parallel. He's still going overseas. He has a group of that he goes out and has rowing sessions and camps throughout the world. And he just came back from Croatia. And he's going to talk about that experience. But what it gives him is a real perspective on what the rest of the world is doing. And I know we have a new rowing coach executive person from Denmark, I believe. And I'd love to hear at some point Amanda's view on that. And I'm sure he's bringing new ideas to the table and evaluating what we're doing here in the United States. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alan Robinson and let him talk a little bit, and then he's going to turn over to Jim. So I'm looking forward to the end of tonight, where we have some time, hopefully, to tell some stories about Jim. And I know Jim has a couple of stories he's going to start the evening off with. So Alan, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, Rick. Let me just a little bit more of Jim's, actually his current status. And Steve McElhenney, who's on the call, who rows with us together in Cape Cod, can attest to this. He is still very fast. After 5 strokes, he's gone. He really, really is. This is great. This is a wonderful group to get together. I just want to really set it up. We're really going to be talking about the potential future of American sculling. But Jim, if you would just take us through the last 60 or so years of American sculling, the evolution, what you've liked, what you're concerned about, and so forth, to set us up for the rest of the conversation.
Great, thanks, Alan. I think Rick's absolutely right. A lot has happened in 60 years. If you think about our history, 60 years ago, if you go back to those old NAO yearbooks, Rick, you'll see that there are probably about 12 to 24 colleges rowing in the United States. Today, that is grown exponentially. So the system was much different. The system was the club system that we all grew up at, whether in Philadelphia or in New York. They were the few high schools and colleges that were rowing out of that club, and they produced athletes. And those athletes then went on, if they were good enough, to represent those clubs during the summer. And I think the fun part about it was that we did race all the time. I mean, pretty much every week you were racing down in Philadelphia or racing up in Boston. And that's how you got better. The clubs at that point were supporting the athletes. Today, it's kind of changed with the economic outlook as to it, because now we have professional coaches in clubs and stuff like that trying to make a living, and the athletes now are supporting the coaches. Rick asked me on one of these calls, what did it cost you to row at the New York Athletic Club? It might have cost me $200 a year to row at the club, and that club was sending me to Europe. That club was sending me to race in Philadelphia. That club was sending me to race all around the country, all around the world. So we had a club system, and it was a very successful club system. It was successful because guys like Billy Belden had a family and he needed to be in Philadelphia. He needed to be training in Philadelphia. And Larry Krakowsky was in New York and he had a family and he needed to be training in New York. But they got together and they raced enough that when it did come to putting together international boats and Olympic boats, the better oarsmen, the Krakowskis, the Beldens would get together. We were all together in Moscow in '73 with the quads, the lightweight doubles, and all of that. But we had a club that was helping to support us, right, and allow us the opportunity to reach our potential, and that changed. First for the 72 Olympics when U.S. rowing moved to the camp system in the 8. And then about 5 years after that, they tried to move to a camp system in the quad as well. I think Rick is right in that back in 72, with the rest of the world changing and going, and the United States going against professional teams, basically the Russians were professionals, the East Germans were professionals. In order for us to combat that, at least in the bigger boats, in the 8s and the 4s, the camp system worked. I think the direction that U.S. rowing is going in now is moving back to that direction where they're putting the impetus on the clubs to help support our national team. The clubs back in the 70s were just irate that, the national team is stealing all their athletes and stuff like that. And I think today the outlook of it in everything that I read this past week, coming from the World Championships, every athlete that was racing, the high school that they rode for, the college they rode for, the club they rode for, were all mentioned in all of the articles. So there's the recognition that the clubs can do it. But I think the main point here, Rick, is the longevity of the athletes. In order to get good on the elite level, you have to be at it for a number of years. Every time you go to the line and race, you're learning something, all right? And you're not going to be fast in 2 or 3 years. It takes a long time to develop the skill to understand your boat class and how fast that boat has to be moving and what your competition is going to be like, So keeping our athletes in the game longer is the hard thing. And I think giving our athletes the opportunity to train in Philadelphia or train in Oakland and be able to continue to have a career. When I came to Philadelphia and was living in the black hole, the first guy that walked up to me was Chuck Colgan. All right. And Chuck Colgan says, "You need a job? Okay, you're working for me in the Philadelphia school system." Half the guys at Vesper were working for Chuck in the Philadelphia school system. He helped supported us, right? Later years, Al Robinson here, he has an environmental engineering firm. He's hiring guys like Tom Bohr and that crowd that went on to win numerous championships for us in Europe over the years. So keeping our athletes in the game, I think, is the key. And if the clubs can help do that and support that system, I think we're going to be successful on the long run.
Jim, talk about the place of sculling in high school and college, what it is, what you think it might, what benefit there would be for doing something different than we're doing now.
On the high school level, we've never been stronger. I mean, right from the Manny Flicks in Philadelphia and the number of sculling events there, talking earlier this year about Jim Barker and how he pushed to get the sculling events in the head of the Schuylkill and all the other regattas. Well, on the junior level, thanks to U.S. rowing and our junior national championships, that junior national championship coming out of 5 regions with athletes from 5 regions qualifying individually for all those different events, our junior national championship today looks like an international regatta. It is run so well. There's such great opportunity for kids, and those kids are gaining skills. The flaw in our system is our kids go to college and then all they do is row sweep boats, right? That's the flaw in our system. All right. And if anybody on this call has any pull with any of the college coaches from your alma maters or whatever, all right, ask them this simple question. Why is rowing the only Olympic sport that the NCAA sponsors that doesn't follow the Olympic events? Swimming, all the events are the Olympic events. Gymnastics, all the Olympic events, right? Track and field, all the Olympic events. Here, we've grown over the past 60 years. We've got this giant pyramid that we've started on the bottom, and then our kids go to college and they lose the sensitivity of moving a small boat because all their coaches just want to put them in the big boats and pound water, and one of the other liabilities that we have in rowing, unfortunately, is that the sport grew so fast, our coaching education hasn't kept pace with it. And a lot of the people that are coaching our athletes really don't understand it. A lot of our collegiate coaches are afraid of coaching sculling. They don't understand it. But in my mind, for all of us on this call, if we want to continue to see our sport grow, we've got to get the colleges into the small boats, because if they do, think about what happens. All right. If you're at the University of Massachusetts and you're a discus thrower and you qualified for the NCAA championship, every newspaper around you, every TV station around you is writing about that athlete, because that's the gold medal standard that athletic directors and most people look at, right? Getting to the NCAAs. So if our athletes in college are qualifying in singles and doubles and pairs to get to an NCAA championship, how much more exposure do we have in the media? How much more opportunity are we going to have to be able to generate dollars to help support our rowing programs because of that exposure? I think that's a big thing, and, U.S. rowing, today, everybody's talking about diversity. Well, how about the diversity of programs, right? If you look at the NCAAs today, there are 21 teams going to the NCAA championship for women, right? 16 of those teams have been there every year for the past 24 years since they started the NCAAs, right? Where are the small programs out there? They're not even considered because they don't have the money, the BCS football money, or the deep pockets of the Ivy League to support these programs. But if we want to grow the sport at the NCAA level or at the IRA level or whatever, you move into the small boats, all of a sudden there's that opportunity for the Cinderella story. That woman coming out of LaSalle College who has never, ever gone to an NCAA championship, winning that championship, and then possibly making a U.S. national team after that. And all the time staying in the sport, right? And it's the same thing on the men's side, and I was hoping Gary Codwell would join us here tonight. He's the director of the IRAs, because up until about 92, 95, the IRAs, right, they were racing in pairs, pair widths, straight fours. At one point, Tony Johnson, I know, wanted to try to get the quad in there, right? And they had all of these programs participating, and they had a really huge, large regatta, and it was great. Everybody could come, and then they kicked the club teams out. The IRA stewards kicked the club teams out. It just went back to the old 8s and 4s, and you lost that element. In my mind, the best collegiate regatta in the country is the ACRA Championship, right? Which is for the U.S. men and women's club teams. They have all the Olympic events. They're rowing singles and doubles and pairs and quads, and you think about how important that is. Just look at Michelle Slesher, right? Who just won the silver medal at the World Championships. She started rowing in California, went to Tulsa, Who was the coach at Tulsa? Kevin Harris. What was Kevin Harris doing? He was promoting sculling. His kids were sculling all fall long. Michelle had the opportunity to scull all through those 4 years of college. A couple of years after that, bam, she's on the Olympic team, and now she's winning medals, right? Because she's still in the sport. There's where we need to go. We need to influence the college programs to changing their system. The other thing that the people on the call should know is the NCAA championship, the size of that championship is dependent on a matrix based on the number of Division 1, 2, or 3 programs that are supporting the sport, right? So if you went to the small boats and more small colleges were able to bolster and support a varsity rowing team, right? That team could be 10 or 15 people, all rowing sculling boats. And we're seeing this on the junior level. We're seeing the high school programs that are just focusing on sculling. I don't know if Steve Quagliano made it on the call tonight, but Steve, after he was our coxswain at the New York AC, after suffering through a business career where he made a lot of money through his whole life, all of a sudden he's retired. What's he doing? He's coaching the Norwalk Rowing Club. What's he done there? Turned the whole club into a sculling club. Every kid there is sculling, you know, and they're all benefiting from that, you know, and that's what we need, getting more people. Well, if we're producing elite teams, it's producing more people to stay in the system in sculling and sweep, you know, but just for the overall health of rowing in the country, if we can get more regattas, the better off we're going to be. You know, Joan Scholes, I see her on the call. Joan, you've got to remember, you know, back in the day, you know, besides the Nationals and the Independence Day Regatta that Rick was talking about, we had the American Henley, right? We had the Schuylkill Navy Regatta. We had all these other regattas, and all those regattas were opportunities for more people to get out and get in their boats and get successful. So I think
Jim,
that's where you wanted me to go on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim, it's interesting because in the weekends we didn't have those regattas in Philadelphia. Probably the same thing in New York AC. We had match races,
Right.
where the coaches would get together. It was like a deck of cards. We deal out who was going to race each other, and so every weekend was filled. That gap was filled. But Jim, let me ask you, because we've talked about this, but why do you think at certain coach levels in colleges there is this reluctance to add sculling events? Is it just because it gets too complicated and the easy way out, I hate to put it that way, is just to deal with the larger boats? Or is it, what do you think is the underlying reason? And I'm sure there's a lot of reasons.
I think there are a lot of reasons. I think one of the big reasons is the fear factor. A lot of these coaches started their rowings, their sweep rowing in college. All they know is sweep rowing, right? They're afraid to go in the other direction. But I think there's another part of it as well, Rick. On both the men's side and the women's side in our collegiate institutions, the teams that are winning, like I said before, they're the big football schools that have plenty of money, or the Ivy League with the deep pockets and stuff like that. They're the players in the show right now. I don't think they want to relinquish any of that power, right? But if it was the Olympic events, they would still have the opportunity to dominate, because there again, they have the money and the opportunity to recruit more and give scholarships and everything else. The thing that would change would be they would have to be going out, if they wanted to win the point trophy, even at the Olympics or the World Championships, you're looking at the medal count as to who's going to win the championship. Everything would have a numerical value to it. They would have to recruit that sculler, right, to win the single.
Sure.
And that sculler might be a lightweight woman or a lightweight guy that's faster than anybody else in the country, or, you know, a double or a quad. You know, they would have to look at those events just like Jack Soldier did, or just like Jim Barker did, or Kelly at Vesper, if they wanted to win the point trophy at our national championships, everybody was entered in every event. I don't know if Nancy Storrs got on the call tonight, from Canada, but the Canadian system on the collegiate level is they bring 20 kids to a championship, and those 20 kids over 2 or 3 days have to row numerous events in singles and doubles and pairs and quads, and then get into the 8.
Is Nancy here? Okay, this would be a good spot to bring Amanda Krause in from US Rowing, because you guys are US Rowing. What, you're well aware of what Jim's been talking about. Are you guys talking with the NCAA? Is there any movement in that direction? How can we help, and so forth?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I thought we were talking about Jim, so I wore my Jim hat, and I think it's something that Jim is wearing. But I'm happy to talk about that. I think, Alan, it's top of mind for us. Jim and I have talked about this. For anyone who doesn't know, Jim was my college coach, so I'm a huge fan and forever indebted to him. We are talking about this. We are speaking with NCAA. We are speaking with USOPC because they're keen. They're the ones who connected us with NCAA, because they obviously are invested in seeing us shift a focus to sculling. I shouldn't say obviously. They are very much interested in us focusing on sculling. In the eyes of the USOPC, and for anyone who isn't familiar with the funding structure, for the national team, the only funding we receive is from, there's no government support. It is from the USOPC. We spend roughly $4 million in direct costs to support the national team, and 1.6 million and change is from the USOPC. So that's a significant gap there. They're interested in us bringing home medals. They'd rather see us bring home, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
My computer just went dark. They'd rather have us win instead of 1-8. They'd rather have us win, the single, a double, a lightweight double, 3 medals versus 1, even if it's fewer athletes, because 1-8 medal is still only 1 medal, even though there are 9 people in the boat. So yeah, I mean, everything that Jim is saying resonates. The trick is working on aligning that desire with the goals of the collegiate coaches, because their mandate is to win medals at NCAAs or at IRAs. And so, it's their goal, understandably, is not to create Olympians, right? So there's a disconnect between the NGB, the national governing body, and the collegiate program, where we would love to find that alignment. But that takes time. The first thing I started almost 2 years ago, and have been working really hard to try to form relationships with the CRCA, for example, on the women's side, and also CRCA, IRA, et cetera. So like Jim said, anyone who knows collegiate coaches, I think there's definitely an interest there. We'd also love to see men's rowing become an NCAA sport. I know that's controversial. We certainly would support it, but it's kind of finding that alignment there, and open to any allies in that effort for sure, and completely agree on the sculling front.
Yeah. Creating more events, I think, is going to help the sculling front as well, Amanda, and the direction US Rowing is going there is great, in that we have coastal rowing. And I'll throw this out to Tom Feaster. Tom was on the board with me of US Rowing for a time, and he started the Stewards Foundation down in Tampa, Florida. And Tom has got into coastal big time since we first discussed this on the board of directors. His club is supporting it a lot. Last year, he put a bunch of people in, going on to the world team. Bill Donahoe on the call, also an ex-board member. He started the Coastal Series in the Great Lakes. All of this is sculling, but Tom, I think you're dragging your feet. Are you on the call, Tom?
Yeah, I'm on the call. I'm right
Good.
here.
I think you're dragging your feet, Tom, because you've got a perfect opportunity the start of Florida State Coastal Championship. You got Tampa, you got Southern Florida there. I know Stetson is going into coastal boats. You gotta get on the line and get more colleges involved and get a coastal series for the colleges down there. I think that might be a step into moving the sport.
Yeah, I've actually registered Florida Coastal Rowing as a DBA of the Stewards Foundation now. And we are working with some folks in Palm Beach for that. One of the exciting things that I've been involved with is the South Jersey group, even though it's far away from here. They've established a board of directors of South Jersey Coastal Rowing and have bought 6 boats already. They've got a boathouse to row in underneath the bridge in Ocean City. I've done a couple clinics up there for them.
That's the lifeguards, right?
They're the lifeguards,
Right.
that basically have an infrastructure already set up for surfboat racing for those that, have been lifeguards and they want to continue it. And now they're adding coastal rowing to that group. And, at the trials this year, our kids did well again. We had 2 kids from the Stewards Foundation that were the male and female coastal athlete of the year that won their events again, in addition to another under 19 event. So 2 of those kids are rowing in 4 or 5 races over in Wales. So the thing that got me into it though was sculling, because before even getting a coastal boat or anything like that, Jim, what we did, knowing that we were going to experiment and go to the trials last year, was that I basically spent a lot of time with them. I'm one of those. The Stewards are one of those clubs that have almost all scullers, right? Mm-hmm. And so the kids knew how to scull, and what we did was we spent a lot of time with them doing some funny stuff in flat water, throwing wakes in front of them, having them row backwards for thousands and thousands of meters, to try to be able to almost be able to stand on their head in that boat with their skill levels, and throwing some Gatorade cans out there and having them turn in the Wintech small boats, and then going over to Sarasota every once in a while to do the other things, which were the starts and the turns and things like that. But my assessment of this, been through the trials a couple of times, and then last year in Portugal, was as I sat there and I watched the world event, sculling, even though they're beach sprints and they're only 500 meters, the scullers did the best. It's one thing to be able to jump in a boat and, get on the seat and go around the buoys and do stuff like that. And I think there's a lot of coaches, and I think you're going to find that a lot of the world coaches spend a lot of time worrying about those intricacies of the thing, because of course you can win or lose the race. But if you don't know how to scull, you're not going to be in it in the first place. And, the various things that, and I think I might have mentioned this to you, but the incorrectness of the technique where one hand is way over top of the other, not having the real skills to really understand how to push backwards and go forward. These are all things that you can teach on flat water. And, it's sort of like with the South Jersey groups, they got mad at me one time because they were saying, well, we all rowed in college and this, that, and the other thing, and these lifeguards rowed in college. And I go, you know what? I'd prefer at the camp that we're doing up there, which we did in the summer, we did a couple of them, was make sure they know how to scull, right? If we teach them how to go around buoys and things like that, I don't want to have to spend an awful lot of time, teaching somebody how to scull. So and all of a sudden they went, whoa, wait a minute. We rowed in the sweep base, and who does he think he is? I was some kind of horrible person. But I think they all realized that at the end of the day, because we had 4 boats from New Jersey that came down, and they basically they rowed under the Stewart Foundation, but they were second in every event they rowed in, and they were the elite coastal guys. So I think, getting back to your comment, was it's not just Florida, right? It's a matter of trying to get some of these, like, what Bill is doing, and what Oreo is doing up there as well. I mean, they're just doing terrific things. Jim Henderson over in Sarasota, who basically just opens his place up for anybody who even wants to learn how to row in a coastal boat. But it's all about sculling, in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't want to drift too far off the topic here, but the point is, for all of us, we've all benefited from this sport, and we want to continue to pay it forward. And right now, I just saw the thing that Amanda put on here, where direct athlete support is going to follow the athletes wherever they go, and I think that's great. Going to the clubs and helping to support the clubs, but everybody here can support their club, just like the old timers did that supported us, and I encourage everybody to get down to their boat club and help out in some way and make some contributions and whatever, and keep it going. Just want to say hi to Bill. Bill, you survived the hurricane?
Yeah, we had 14 inches of rain, but everything else is good. Thanks.
Good.
Jim.
You got boats. You're good to go. You got rain, you got boats. You're good.
We don't have as far of a walk from the boathouse to the lake anymore.
No, is that right?
Say, Jim, it's Rick again, but because I know they're about to name or have named a facility after you in Mystic, and it's a community rowing program primarily. How do you view these community rowing programs, which are great, which are coming forthwith in many locations, including now Philadelphia, you and Mystic and so forth? How do we leverage them to help engage, sculling, for instance, and increase, the sport? Is that a conduit for these?
Rick, it's all about growing the base. I think that's great. Yeah, I'm fortunate in that a number of the guys that I had coached back in the day are putting some money together, and they're creating the Dietz Rowing Center in Mystic, Connecticut. It's actually the Mystic Stonington project. John Thornell was there. Also, part of it is the Hart Perry Boathouse will be part of that, and Hart was a past president of U.S. Rowing and longtime supporter of rowing. It's getting more kids in the sport. There are two goals here: getting kids into the boat young, so they develop well and become good citizens, and have fulfilling lives. And then there's that small percentage that are going to go up and do us proud, making our world and Olympic teams, that we're seeing here, and we all want to support them. I look at a club not far from Mystic, Old Line, Connecticut, that was started by Fred Emerson way back in the day. This past Olympics, they had 2 oarsmen on that Olympic team that came from that little lake right in Connecticut. So you never know where that little acorn is going to grow into a big tree. But again, it's broadening our sport across the country. It's getting more programs, more regattas, more people into it, more coaching education. All of this is great stuff. Think about it, Rick. When you and I were rowing, was there any really masters rowing going on?
Very, very little.
Very little. There wasn't a regatta for them. The old timers at the New York Athletic Club were guys that were hanging around just because they loved to row, and the coaches put them to work coaching the kids. Now you have this whole other dimension of rowing, and people being drawn into the sport. I just coached 14 of them on the Charles River over the past 3 days. They're like sponges, and we want everybody to get that experience that we have. So I think we can get past this part of the night and maybe have some fun stories. You had some questions, didn't you,
Okay.
Rick?
I think this is the point where we want to temporarily toss it over to Jen, because Jen has an announcement.
Yeah, we're just going to make a quick announcement because we do want to go to that second portion of the night. I think people are antsy to hear these Jim Dietz stories. But I just wanted to say, the head of the Schuylkill Regatta does have our annual awards. We call them Legacies of the Schuylkill. And Jim has the path you have blazed, your contributions to American rowing, and the effect on lives of the rowers and coaches and the community have extended to the Schuylkill River, but far beyond Boathouse Row. And for that 2022, we will have the men's and women's championship quads named in your honor. So we're looking forward to pushing that out too.
Love
Nice.
that.
Yeah.
I'm going to start out on the question.
You talk about the quad as an event, and the quad as an event, as it became an international event, was the work of two people, Jim Barker and Jack Soldier. The quad was an event that was rowed in the United States, all right, pretty much alone. And those two guys pushed Tommy Keller and Fiza to making that quad first in a world event, right, Rick? We had the exhibition in Moscow in 73. By 74, it was a world event. And by 76, it was an Olympic event. So two Americans pushed international rowing into the quad. And now the quad is the most popular event at those big regattas.
Well, it's interesting, Jim, that, because, I do a lot of historical research, and you go way back to the 1900s, you see a lot of trophies and so forth refer to the centipede event. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out what is a centipede. Is that like 100 scullers or whatever it is? But in the old days, the quad used to be called the centipede. So you see in the old Schuylkill Navy records,
Right.
whenever you see a centipede, they're really talking about a quad. So it goes way back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We are going to segue into story hour, and I'm going to ask, there's a story that I could tell, but Jim could tell it much better. And this really relates to us, we from Philadelphia, and probably arguably the greatest, most famous 8 that ever came out of Philadelphia, which was the 64 Vesper crew. But Jim literally had a hand in that Vesper crew. So Jim, would you tell the story of your connection as, I guess, a 15-year-old to what became the Olympic gold medal team from Philadelphia?
Okay, so in 1964, the Olympic trials was at Orchard Beach in New York, right? In 1964, everyone except for the Vesper Boat Club was rowing in a standard Pocock 8, which was 62 feet long. The starting platform that was constructed by the city of New York, right, was basically a pier with 6 diving boards on it, right? And the stake boat boy would lay on the diving board, similar to what they have today, holding the sterns of the boats. Well, Vesper shows up with a Donna Rodico from Italy. It was only 58 feet long. So the stake boat person couldn't hold the Vesper 8 from that diving board. So what they did is they brought in another float that went in front of that diving board. I was on that float holding the Vesper stern, and another stake boat person was holding my legs. That's the only way that they could line the boat up. So they couldn't have won the Olympic trials without me. And then they certainly couldn't have won the Olympics, So that was my claim to fame at 15 years of age.
Great.
I remember on the first trip I went with overseas, and you were on the airplane with the rest of the team. We're going over to Amsterdam. And I hadn't been on the plane with you guys before, but there was something you did with the stewardesses in terms of the bags. Can you tell us about
No, that wasn't me. That was Al Sheely from Harvard. All
Well,
right,
you were
so
part of that.
we're flying over on KLM, right? And we're going through some turbulence, and all of a sudden, one of the engines starts sputtering. And Al Sheely goes, "Jim, block the aisles. Don't let the stewardesses come back here." He grabs the PA system And he says, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. As you might have noticed, we have some technical difficulties here with the plane. At this time, I would like all of the swimmers on the plane to move to the right side. All of the non-swimmers, please move to the left side. When the plane hits the water, all the swimmers on the right side get out and proceed in order away from the plane. Those on the left side of the plane, thank you for flying KLM. You would be arrested today to do something like that. He was a very funny guy. I can remember Fred Dooling. I see you there. Fred, you remember when we were in Moscow and the Russians locked us out of the boathouse? Yeah, you're on mute still, Fred. So the story there was the Russians locked us out of the boathouse. So we went in and knocked the pins out of the door and took the doors off so we could get our boats out. That was a good night.
Well,
Good.
everybody else, please chime in with some stories. You know, we have time here. Let's hear. Anybody got any other Jim Dietz? Good or bad?
Amanda, he coached you. Tell us about Jim as a coach.
Oh my goodness. Jim was amazing. So we were a club team before Jim came over, and I was in his first group of becoming varsity. So it was a really incredible experience in so many different ways. And I don't think you had officially coached women before, right, Jim? I mean, in the summers you had.
Right.
And you were married to a woman.
Right. And she thought that this was the best thing that was going to happen to me in my life, coaching women. She thought I was a little bit too rough on the guy side.
So, there was a learning curve there for all of us, including Jim, because Pam is a saint. It is so true. We all loved Pam. And I remember I was co-captain that year, and I remember bringing Jim our first winter erg scores, and he looked at them and he said, "You guys all stink." And I said, "Well, Jim, like 707, 709, like this, I don't know, like some people are pretty happy with these scores." And I don't know if you'd ever seen like women's 2Ks or anything, but he was so used to just seeing men's scores. So it was just so much fun, and just there was so much joy in trips we took with Jim. And I think the biggest thing is, no, Jim did not bring us flowers ever, so that's a rumor. But a couple things. One thing was, Jim really said to us, he said, "None of you have forgotten how to row. You've just never actually learned how to row before." And he was so meticulous about how we rowed. And for so long, I remember we were all thinking, this guy's insane, because he would say, and then at this point, your outboard arm needs to come up a tiny, no, not like that, not like that, not, yes, no, yes, no. And we just remember thinking, this guy's nuts. I mean, he'd have us rowing in circles because 2C just didn't like how she rowed. So we would fix her and fix her some more and fix her some more and fix her some more and fix her some more. Oh my God. And then I'll never forget being out on the Connecticut River, and one spring day, Jim, I'm sure you've done this a million times, so you probably don't even remember this. He killed his engine. He was out with the varsity in the JV8, and he killed his engine. And he said, "All right, way enough." And he said, "Now you're perfect." And he was absolutely right. At that moment, at least, we were perfect. And, it led to winning everything that season: Division II national championships, medaled at IRAs. I mean, on and on. He was right. Like all of the things he was doing to get us to row just right, really paid off. And so, to this day, I'm so appreciative of people who are technicians in rowing, as Jim was and still is. And then in starting, Row New York years after graduating, Jim was the person I would call, and I said, "Jim, I'm starting a program in New York City for girls who wouldn't normally be rowing or have access to the sport." And he said, "I'll show up with a boat." And he did. He drove into New York City with a boat on top of a truck with his kids. There isn't anything he wouldn't do for me to get that program started. And, you know, it's just the definition of selfless in that sense, and keeping the joy in the sport, and so generous with his time and his energy. And to this day, I feel like even as CEO of US Rowing, I can text him like, Jim, how do you do this thing? And he's just, again, so generous in that sense, and giving, and has such a contagious like love for this sport that any of us who know Jim are so blessed to be around him and to be around that energy and that knowledge. And I mean, you know this, Jim, but I'm just so grateful.
Well, that crew of yours, Amanda, all right, with the Philly head of the Schuylkill connection, you were the first collegiate crew ever to win the women's championship 8 at the head of the Schuylkill. But the only reason I wanted you guys to go to the head of the Schuylkill was that so you could all experience the Vesper Halloween party.
Jim, don't tell them about that. No.
Okay.
When
yeah,
they're
you can't
older.
do that. You can't do that stuff today.
No, and you know what else you can't do? I have one more Jim story, and then I'll stop because I don't want to monopolize this. But I'll never forget it at I think it was IRA's. Jim was somehow out in a coaching launch. I don't think that would be allowed anymore. And when we finished the race, he said, bring me over to the boat. And he had a 6-pack of beers. And I don't know if you remember this, Jim. He threw us each a cold beer, and probably only half of us were able to catch them because we're rowers. And, you know, we're like, oh, caught the beer. And somebody in the launch was like, no, Jim, you're NCAA now. Like, you can't, you're breaking so many rules right now. Like, you shouldn't even be here. And he's like, what? My guys just did really well. I'm going to give them a beer. And we're all like, thanks, Jim. Not beer, it's seltzer. But, you know, it was just so great because he just was like, I'm celebrating with my guys. And he called us his guys because
you got to have fun. That's right.
Yeah.
I think Cal Coffey is on the call. Cal, if I recollect right, you were together with Jim at Northeastern. Can you give us some insight? If you're there.
Vic Pazinski's on the call. He's from Northeastern.
Okay, go ahead.
May have to unmute.
Hello.
Victor.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you hear me now?
Hey, well, good evening.
Hi.
Jim, I don't want you to be nervous now that I'm your past. I'm the history. 1967, I had the opportunity to meet the top high school sculler in the United States. And we were teammates. We came into Northeastern as freshmen under Ernie Arlett. And you talk about small boats. Well, there was the man that was his philosophy. I mean, as kids coming in, if we had any experience, a few of us did. We had a couple of Canucks with us, the Canadians. And so we had a little bit of experience in our boat, but Ernie was a firm believer in everybody being in the small boats to hone their skills. Of course, as a competitive sculler himself coming from Henley, it was quite an honor. Back then, as a kid, you didn't realize what you had. And, as far as the only fly in the ointment was Jim was competing regularly against Bob Arlett, who was Ernie's son.
Yeah.
So we had a little bit of a conflict of interest through those 4 years, Jim.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I knew Jim. I had the good fortune of knowing him not only as a teammate, but as a roommate. And I don't know, Jim, should I use the term classmate? Were we in the classes enough? No.
Yeah. Eventually we went into class and took an exam or two.
Yeah. But, it was a very interesting thing because here he is as a world-renowned individual in a sport, yet and I say we, there were some of our roommates who were non-rowers that still bond and get together, and Jim is part of that, so it's a special thing. I do still see Jim in some rowing, but to know him then. But, you know, Amanda, you were talking about him as an individual, as a, you know, taking one for the team. Jim, I'm not going to name any names in this story, though, to protect the innocent. But Northeastern's program began in 1965. So here we are in 67. Our freshman year was 68 to compete. So we were only a few years into the Northeastern program. And Northeastern was very much behind rowing. And they had a new natatorium there. And downstairs, they put in a workout facility for the crew. And they had a rowing tank put in. And yeah, it was Ernie's prize, that rowing tank. I mean, here we are, you know, a bunch of upstarts, and we've got ourselves a full-fledged 8-man rowing tank. Well, I forget what year it was. I think we were a little bit later on, maybe junior or senior year. We were working out in the tank during the winter. And one of the guys decided he was a bit of a jokester, and he bought a couple of bottles of Joy liquid. And he proceeded to pour one in each side of the tank. And all I remember is we started churning the water. And before you know it, I mean, the place was full of bubbles and foam. Everybody found it funny except Ernie. And I couldn't figure it, but Ernie, you know, for him to use bloody hell, I mean, that was pretty strong. And he was pretty irate. And he wanted to find out who the culprit was. And I can speak because I know the truth. It wasn't Dietz, but Dietz, to protect his roommates, stood up and he took it. He said, "I did it," and we all knew. Well, at the time we didn't, but Jim, God bless you. I mean, I don't know.
Jim took the fall.
You stroked our varsity boat, and
Yeah.
so I think you know, it didn't affect that much. But it's still
Great, thanks.
a
Thanks,
great
thanks,
experience.
Rick. Cal, you're off mute now. Did you want to add anything?
Hey, Jim and I were roommates
Oh,
in college. And
thank you.
back then, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Cal.
All right. And so my mode of transportation was I had a Norton Commando, an 850 Commando.
That's a big bike.
And we used to ferry Jim around to all our rowing events and whatnot. And Jim always wanted to, let me start it. And that's how I got all my my spare cash from Jim, because I'd say $20, you can't get it started. And he would watch me start it every day. But you had to turn on the key, you had to tickle the carburetor, you had to turn on the gas.
There was a trick.
Yeah, there's a certain technique to it, and Jim never really paid that much attention to it.
Yeah.
But it was fun.
We had good times.
Good.
I was telling a story about you just yesterday, Victor, because when we were freshmen, we wanted to paint the railroad bridge at the head of the Charles, right? So we're all pumped up and we go onto this railroad bridge, and 56 years later, I still have never seen a train go across that bridge, except for the night that we painted it. All right. And this train starts coming across the bridge, and we've got to literally jump into the Charles River with the paint. And I was telling everybody what the lesson was is, if you're going to be a moron and paint the bridge, don't use oil-based paint, because you'll be red and black for the next 2 weeks.
Hey, I gotta add one other thing. I mentioned Jim stroking the varsity boat our senior year. Well, it so happened Ernie rigged the boat starboard. And who do you think was right behind him in the 7th seat but Calvin Coffey?
Calvin, yeah.
So Cal, you got to admit, Jim taught you everything you knew there.
Yeah.
We stepped out of the boat, and of course, the next 2 years, Calvin and his crew go on to win the Eastern Sprints 2 years in a row.
That's another great story that we were talking about just this year, Calvin, because Rick rebuilds classic boats. And I said, well, Calvin Coffey is the only Olympian in history to win his medal rowing in a boat that he built.
They designed and built it. Yeah.
That's it, right down in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Bill, if I remember right from actually rowing with Jim, it's story hour every morning. It's great. If I remember right, Bill, you go back to New York, Bill Donahue, you go back to New York AC with Jim, right? Or am I remembering wrong?
That's correct, Alan.
Tell us about Jim in New York AC.
Well, no, I just wanted to fill in on Larry's story because you were talking about how he had won 800 races. And, he got fast when he moved to Philadelphia when he was doing his, his
Medical
follow-up
school.
to med school
Right.
at the Navy, because he was a doctor for the Navy. But, he's from my home state in Minnesota. And the old joke up on the Northwest International Rowing Association was, if Larry was in your race, you didn't have to worry about being last.
That's right.
And it shows you how important it is to stay with the sport. And, the one thing that sculling does is it makes our sport more accessible so that we can keep our kids engaged, because now, the format, we used to race from bridge abutment to bridge abutment, right, Jim?
Yep.
I mean, we didn't have buoys and stuff.
No, there were workouts in New York where along Orchard Beach Lagoon, you'd race from the burnt out Volkswagen to the burnt out Chevy.
Yeah, and it was every Sunday was race day. We had the sculling ladder. You knew where you stood in the club, and if you wanted to get faster, that was the progression. And I joke about it. Jim and Larry were really generous with their time. They tell you what the workout was going to be, and as long as you stayed in step with what the workout was, you were welcome to participate. But the minute you made it a race, it was lesson over. And if you didn't learn from that, I feel sorry for you. So that's what Jim taught me.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, could you talk a little about your coach? Talk a little about Jack Soldier.
Jack Soldier, he was just an amazing guy, New York City cop. Then he became a lawyer after that. But, Jack's ambition in life was to beat everything Philadelphia, right? If Philadelphia put a buoy line, which an overhead line across at the quarter mile at the Philly course, we had to have a line going across our course, right? So Jack gets us to string a line across our course so we can put lane numbers on it so we can be like Philadelphia. Well, we use like oak tag paper and numbers that we painted on or whatever. And over time, those numbers fell off, right? But the cable was still across the lagoon. Well, one summer day, a New York City helicopter is coming along, spraying for mosquitoes and stuff. It gets clotheslined on that cable and crashes into the lagoon, And Jack simply goes, Vinny, you get down there real quick, pull that line in so nobody sees it. He was a character, but he promoted sculling. In fact, up in Canada, the Canadian Henley, Jack pushed them to put the quad in as an event. And, I think the first quad race up there was in the late 60s, early 70s. Sandy was part of that boat. Mike Verlin was part of that boat. And Larry.
Jim Barker, to his dying day almost, if you mention Jack Soldier's name, the fire would come out of his nostrils. Like, damn, Jack Soldier, because there was a rivalry going on between those two. It was almost like hate, but there's also a lot of respect there. But
there was respect. My favorite Jim Barker story that I didn't tell when he was alive, when we had the Jim Barker night, was we had the Nationals in New York in 71, and the New York AC won the Barnes Trophy, the Point Trophy, right? Undyne came in second. The very next weekend, we're at Princeton rowing to qualify, to win our race so we could go off to the World Championships in Amsterdam. I forget where it was. Well, Matt Good, that rowed for the AC, he had a pickup truck with this thing on the back, and he used to carry Mustang horses in it. So Jim comes walking by Jack, and Jack goes, Jim, great racing last week. God, Jim, you got out of town so quick. You didn't pick up the second place trophy. And Jim is hook, line, and sinker in. And Jack goes, it's in the back of that red pickup truck over there. Jim goes, looks in the back of the pickup truck. There's nothing but horse shit. He was fuming.
Okay, so my recollection at the Jim Baxter story hour, he was asked, or maybe you've been asked this before, and Rick, you probably know the story of who Jim Barker thought was the finest sculler. I mean, Jim hated New York AC, absolutely hated New York AC. But what did Jim Barker say about the person here from New York AC? Rick, do you remember?
So I'm assuming he said Jim Dietz.
Yeah, he did.
He said
I
that
was
Jim Dietz
surprised
was the
too.
finest sculler he's ever seen,
Yes,
despite being from New York.
Who else could he be saying except for Larry? You know,
Yeah,
but
right.
those two guys together, you're an unbeatable combination on
Yeah.
and the double and then the two singles and
Yeah.
for years. And like me and Fred was on the call, we can tell from a personal experience how unbeatable you were, and it's quite a legacy. And and everybody we just enjoyed the competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see
Those
Al
of you who
Wacklin
don't
on
know
the
Jim.
call. Al, you remember the first time that we raced?
Yes, I do.
No, Al Wacklin, not Al
Oh,
Robinson.
Al Wacklin.
Al, you remember? I think the first time I raced you was at the Canadian Henley. You were rowing with Robinson in the double, and I was rowing with Frank Soldier.
Yeah,
Wow.
I remember. Yeah, I remember that. I led for about 300 meters, and then you were gone.
Yeah. Hey, Pam, you got any stories from the old days? Unmute. Yeah.
Lower left corner.
There
Oh,
you
we
go.
better not tell them. No,
You better not
I
tell
just
them.
remembered after the Vesper parties, we'd all go down to Chinatown and eat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
I
Am
also
I
have a-
muted?
They can hear you.
We
Oh,
can hear
sorry. Hi, Pam. I was just in the other room. Sorry.
What did Jack Soldier always
Hi,
have in the
Jen.
trunk of his car?
They have all the same.
What did he have in the trunk of his car, Joan?
Yes, Jack Soldier, always.
Probably
After
his
Regatta.
guns.
Pardon?
Probably his guns.
No, he always had tasty cake and beer.
Oh.
Oh, and that was what you had after.
But he was a
Regatta.
Philadelphian at heart.
Yes, that's true. At least the tasty cake went with the beer.
Yeah.
My favorite Jack Soldier story is and it's a long story, but I ended up in the singles race, and Jim, you were in the singles race, and I had to row in lane 7 up at New York AC, and so when Jack told me this, I said, "Well, Jack, there is no lane 7," and he said, "Oh yeah, it's out there. You'll find it."
It's right next to lane 6.
Well, and then Jim Barker, when I told Jim Barker what was going on, and he was livid. He said, "Tell you what, Rick, you're pretty good off the line. You're a fast quarter mile dash. Just rip off and go into lane 6." And that's what I did. And Jack wasn't very happy about that.
Yeah.
They were the good old days.
Yeah. Good old days.
Well,
I
let's hope
just have a Schuylkill Navy book, but it only starts in 1938.
Wow.
Yeah, I just found it in the bookcase. 38 to 58.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
But don't
I
lose
bought
that.
other, but
That's a valuable book.
I have a lot of them. Many, many.
Okay, it's kind of getting late. This has been great. As I did briefly remark, Jim was the fastest back in the day,
True.
but I think he's hoping to show us in I guess 3 weeks at the head of the Charles and 4 weeks at the head of the Schuylkill that he's still the fastest.
It's all about showing up
maybe
these
in the 70
days.
plus category, but that he still is. What do you think, Jim?
feeling good, but it's all about showing up. That's all you need today. Yeah.
We'll keep-
And Jen, I want to thank you for that honor of naming those boats, those trophies at the Schuylkill. That's very thoughtful. Thank you.
Sure.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, we you know, it's fun getting everyone together for these story hours, but you know, the true reason behind it is because we want folks to know about you and Jim Barker, and we want folks to know about these rowers and these coaches and these folks that have really guided our sport. And you know, by naming races after them, we want them to know the name, but also to learn about them so those stories can be passed down. Someone was talking about just, you know, the access. Being in a single just really does provide that access. And I mean, I can remember being in college, and I never thought that you would row after leaving, you know, your 4 college years and leaving in 8. And you know, because I was from Philadelphia, I knew that there were opportunities for masters rowers, but I've been with college women nowadays, and you know, we gathered with a group of women, masters rowers, and they couldn't believe that many people are past college out there rowing. And it's just, I think we just need to connect those communities more. I think that will also help the growth of the sport. And like you said, I mean, I think everyone here tonight has said, just being able to keep the athletes in the long game and knowing that the sport, you know, has a long game is pretty awesome. So we thank you guys for making that possible for so many of us, and making it fun and interesting at the same time. Amanda, I have those same stories of beers on the sideline, things that you never can think about happening today. But you know, those are the memories that, and you know, they keep people in that game.
Before Jim closes, I'd just like to add, for anybody who would like to connect with Jim and has it in a long, doesn't have his email address and so forth, email Jen Wesson, or HOSR, and Jen will you know, forward you Jim's email address. And anybody who wants to connect with anybody else who's on this call, I think you could contact Jen, and she would give you their email address, and you can connect. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Could I just finish up with one thing here?
Sure.
John Thornell, if anybody wants to contribute to the Jim Dietz Rowing Center in Mystic, Connecticut, could you tell them where they could do that?
I just put the link in the chat, but it's Stonington.
Oh, it's in the chat. Great.
Yeah, StoningtonCommunityRowing.org. Jim has just brought a lot of excitement to the project. We've got a public high school program. It's over 2 decades old. We row out of the Mystic Seaport, and we just can't grow any further. I mean, we can't take anyone. We're asked every year, you know, dozens and dozens of times if we could take middle school kids, other high school kids, masters rowers, and we just can't. You know, we're on borrowed facilities as it is, and it's going to be a great project where we can, you know, open up the sport to a lot more people in our corner of the state. But yeah, StoningtonCommunityRowing.org is where you go.
Thanks, John.
The architect put up some really cool renderings. We just had an event a couple of weeks ago, and the place looks great. So those renderings are up there too. You can get a look at what the site looks like.
Thanks, John.
Hello, Jim. You there?
We can hear you.
Hi, Jim. It's Paul.
Paul Inquest. How are you, Paul?
Good. I'm going to be at the head of the Charles, and I hope to run into you there and connect in person a little bit.
Good.
Sounds great. Looking forward to seeing you. All right.
Hey, Jim, from all of us, thank you so much for everything, and keep on pushing, keep on moving it forward. It's a great thing.
Got to keep paying it forward. We should all do that.
Thank you, Jim.
All right.
Yeah,
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for
showing up.
Come to the head of the Schuylkill Regatta, the October 29th and 30th, or go to our website because there's live streaming. And Tom Tolan, who's not with us tonight because he's flying out to California on a vacation, but Tom will be our #1 broadcaster on our live stream, and Jim will be with Tom.
I'll be broadcasting
a good deal of the
too.
regatta, and it will be a lot of fun. So if you're not in Philly, or if you're in Philly, sign on and you'll get a lot more Jim Dietz.
Thanks a lot.
All right, stay safe, everyone, and good night. I'll send a
Good night,
follow-up
Jim.
email with all
Good
this good
night,
information.
everybody.